The wind screamed around the little stone cottage, a constant, keening wail that had been my only companion for 6 long months. It was the sound of my exile, the anthem of my disgrace. I pulled my thin, patched shawl tighter, but it did nothing against the cold that seeped through the very bones of this mountain prison. They called it mercy, banishment instead of execution, but on this forgotten peak, with winter's teeth sinking deep, it was just a slower death sentence. I was Lyra, once the chief healer of the Silvercrest Kingdom. Now I was nothing. An Omega, stripped of title, of purpose, of hope. My crime? Speaking a truth that poisoned ears. I had uncovered a sickness in the kingdom's heart, a pattern of silenced voices and stolen lives. For that, Lord Chancellor Valerius, the king's own advisor, had torn the healer's sigil from my robes and cast me out to die. And I had almost let his sentence be carried out. The fire was dying. I had no more wood. I stared at the embers, wondering if freezing in my sleep would be a gentler end than starvation. That's when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the wind. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It came from the heavy oak door, a desperate, dragging sound. My breath caught. No one came here. No one survived the journey here, not in this blizzard. My heart, numb for half a year, began to pound a frantic, fearful rhythm. It could be a trick, another one of Valerius's assassins, sent to finish the job they thought the winter would do. I had already fought off 2 in the early months. My hands, trained to mend, had learned to break. I gripped the silver-chased dagger hidden in my skirts. Survival had taught me hard lessons. But then came the whimper. It was a sound of pure animal agony, so profound it cut through the storm's roar and the ice around my own heart. It was not human, it was canine, but deeper, richer, a resonance that spoke of immense size and intelligence, a warhound. Every instinct screamed at me to bar the door, to let the mountain claim another soul. But another instinct, deeper and older, stirred. The healer in me, the part I thought they had killed, awoke with a painful jolt. I moved as if in a trance. I unbarred the door and cracked it open against the shrieking wind. A wall of snow and freezing air hit me, and there, collapsed across my threshold, was a sight that would change everything. It was a warhound, a female of breathtaking size and power, even in her ruin. Her fur, a mix of storm cloud gray and dusky silver, was matted with frozen blood and ice. The snow beneath her was stained a shocking crimson. But it was her belly, swollen and round with impending life, that shattered my last defenses. And her eyes, amber, intelligent, and filled with a pain and pleading so human it stole my breath. In those eyes, I saw my own reflection from 6 months ago, standing before the cold-faced council, begging for mercy for others and receiving only condemnation. "They sent you to die too," I whispered, the words torn from me. The hound, no, I needed a new name. Kayla. Yes, Kayla. She lifted her massive head with a tremor that spoke of unimaginable effort. Her gaze locked with mine, and I didn't just see the plea. I felt it. A whisper in my mind, a psychic brush of pure, desperate need. Save them, please. It wasn't words. It was an image, a feeling, a promise, and a warning all at once. This was no ordinary animal. This was a bonded companion of the royal house, a creature of magic and loyalty, and she had been hunted. My survival sense warred with my soul. Helping her was suicide. It would paint a target on this cottage brighter than any signal fire. But as I looked from her wounded flanks to her pleading eyes, I remembered the faces of the Omega mothers I had failed, the ones Valerius had silenced. I was powerless then. I was not powerless now. "All right," I said, my voice hardening with a resolve I hadn't felt in months. "All right." I grabbed the thick fur of her collar. It was engraved with the king's own crest, a soaring eagle. I pulled with all my strength, my muscles screaming, my boots slipping on the icy stone. "Come on," I grunted. I failed them. I will not fail you. It took agonizing minutes, but I dragged her massive, limp form across the threshold. The moment her tail cleared the door, I slammed it shut, barring us in against the world. The silence inside, broken only by our ragged breathing and the fire's crackle, was deafening. In the dim light, the extent of her injuries made my healer's stomach clench. These were not the ragged tears of a wolf fight. These were clean, deep gashes from swords and daggers. And the blood, it smelled wrong. Metallic, yes, but beneath it, a cloying, sweet scent like rotting lilies. My hands stilled. I knew that smell. Nightshade silver. A rare, vicious poison that attacks the spirit bond between a handler and a hound, causing agony and slow paralysis. It was outlawed. Its only source was the royal alchemist's vault, accessible only to the king and his highest council, Lord Chancellor Valerius. This wasn't an attack. This was an execution, sanctioned from the very peak of the kingdom. Kayla whimpered, a contraction seizing her swollen belly. The pups were coming, whether we were ready or not. And we were not ready. We were trapped in a frozen stone box with poison in her veins and death on our doorstep. I looked from her fearful, intelligent eyes to the dagger in my hand. The healer and the survivor within me fused into one single, burning purpose. "They want you dead," I said, my voice low and steady. "They want your pups dead, which means your pups are important. Important enough to risk everything for." I met her gaze. "Tell me what you know. Show me." I placed my blood-stained hand on her collar. The world dissolved. My cottage vanished. One moment I was on cold stone, the next I was running. I was Kayla. Snow tore at my face, no, her face, as I crashed through skeletal black branches. The pain was a living thing, a fire in my veins where the nightshade silver coiled, and a deeper tearing agony in my side from the sword wound. But greater than the pain was the terror, not for myself, but for the precious lives moving within my belly. I had to reach the mountains. I had to find her, the one they cast out, the healer who saw truths others ignored. Behind me, shouts, torchlight flickering between the trees. They were coming. The memory shifted, blurred. Now I was in a place of stone and shadow, a narrow palace corridor lit by guttering torches. I was hidden, my great body pressed into a deep alcove, my breathing stilled. Two men approached. The first was Commander Jarek, his face a map of old battles, his eyes hard as flint. The second stepped into the torchlight, and even in the memory, a wave of cold dread washed through me. Lord Chancellor Valerius. His hair was silver, his face elegantly composed, but his eyes were like chips of frozen sky. "The hound is too perceptive." Valerius's voice was smooth, almost bored. "She has been looking at me, asking questions with those clever eyes of hers. She knows about the Omega Purge. She suspects the origin of the princess's illness." "She's just an animal, my lord," Jarek grunted. "She is the last of the true line born under the triple moon. Her pups are prophesied. If they are born during the Winter Convergence, they will see through all deception. They will see me. They cannot be born." He handed Jarek a small ornate vial, nightshade silver. "In her evening meal, make it look like a wasting sickness. The king will mourn, but he will not question." The memory ripped away again. Now I was in the kennels, a bowl of rich meat before me. The scent of the poison was hidden beneath herbs, but not from my senses. I looked up and saw the stable hand who brought it. His eyes were frightened, guilty. He was a good man, forced into evil. I nudged the bowl away. I didn't eat. But the next day, the king's own squire, a boy I had watched grow up, brought another. He smiled, petting my head. For strength, girl. His touch was genuine. He did not know. This time, the poison was undetectable. I ate, trusting the boy. The fire in my veins began an hour later. The final memory was a blur of panic and purpose, knowing I was poisoned, knowing the pups were coming, using the last of my strength to slip my bonds, to vanish into the night, to run towards the one place in the kingdom no one would look for a royal warhound, the exile's tomb in the mountains, towards the one person who had defied Valerius and lived. The vision snapped. I gasped, wrenching my hand from Kayla's collar as if burned. I stumbled back, hitting the cottage wall, my breath coming in ragged sobs. The cold stone against my back was the only real thing. It was all true. Every suspicion, every whispered fear. Valerius was a rot at the heart of the kingdom. He had poisoned the princess, Ilara. He had ordered the deaths of gifted Omegas. He had tried to murder Kayla and her unborn pups to stop some ancient prophecy. And Kayla? She had run 200 miles through a blizzard, poisoned and pregnant, to find me, because she knew I would fight. Another contraction seized her, a powerful ripple across her swollen middle. She let out a low, guttural moan. The pups were coming now. The convergence, the alignments of the 3 moons. Was it tonight? The storm hid the sky. I had no time to process. The howl of the wind outside changed pitch. Beneath it, I heard a new sound, the jingle of bridles, the crunch of heavy boots on snow, voices muffled but drawing nearer. They had found us. Panic, sharp and acidic, rose in my throat. I had a poisoned, laboring warhound and no weapons but a dagger and my wits. The fire was almost out. We were trapped. Kayla's head lifted. Her amber eyes glowed in the gloom. She looked at the door, then back at me. No fear in her gaze now. Only resolve. And that psychic whisper touched my mind again, clearer this time. They come. Protect the circle. The light will find us. The circle? The light? I didn't understand, but I trusted her. This creature had seen my soul and chosen me. I moved on instinct. I wouldn't let them take us in the dark. I dumped the last of my precious water onto the fire, not to extinguish it, but to douse the flames and create a great billow of steam and smoke that filled the cottage in seconds. In the blinding, choking cloud, I grabbed the bundles of silver leaf I kept for poultices and threw them onto the hot, wet embers. Acrid, gray smoke began to mix with the steam. It was harmless to me, but to a shifter or anyone with enhanced senses, it would burn like acid. My first defense. My second was the floor itself. Over my months alone, I had woven tough, near-invisible strands of thornvine, a mountain plant with needles like daggers, across the floor in a specific pattern. I knew the safe path, an intruder would not. I knelt beside Kayla, my dagger in one hand, my other resting on her heaving side. "I am with you," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "We face this together." The sounds outside stopped right at the door, a moment of terrifying silence, then a heavy thud. The oak door, hardened by ice, shuddered but held. Another thud. A crack splintered up the middle. Thud. With a scream of tearing wood and iron, the door exploded inward. Snow and splinters filled the air. Framed in the ruined doorway, backlit by the bleak white light of the blizzard, stood Commander Jarek. 4 armed soldiers flanked him, their faces hard and impersonal. Jarek's eyes swept the smoky room, past the steaming fire pit, and landed on Kayla and me. A slow, grim smile touched his lips. "Lyra, still causing problems, I see. And you found the king's missing hound. How convenient." He stepped inside, his boots crunching on wood debris. "By order of the royal council, the rabid beast is to be put down, and any accomplices dealt with." He took another step and screamed. The thornvine, triggered by his weight, snapped up from the floorboards. It coiled around his leg with vicious speed, the long needles punching through his leather greaves and into his flesh. He stumbled, cursing violently. "You bitch!" he snarled, hacking at the vine with his sword. It was the distraction I needed. As the other soldiers hesitated, I moved. I flung a handful of the damp, smoking embers and silver-leaf ash from the fire pit directly into the face of the nearest soldier. He shrieked, clawing at his eyes as the acrid smoke attacked his senses. Chaos erupted, but Jarek was already free, his leg bleeding. His eyes locked on Kayla, who was panting, a pup beginning to crown. "Kill the hound first," he roared. A soldier lunged past me, sword raised high for a killing strike on the helpless Kayla. I didn't think. I threw myself forward, not with the dagger, but with my body. I collided with him, throwing off his aim. His blade came down, but it sliced across my upper arm instead of Kayla's throat. White-hot pain seared through me, but I clung to him, dragging him down onto another hidden thornvine trap. His scream joined the cacophony, but there were too many. Jarek was advancing again, his sword pointed at Kayla's head. I was on the floor, wounded, too far away. Kayla tried to rise, to defend herself, but a massive contraction bowed her body, leaving her utterly vulnerable. This was it. After everything, we would die here in the smoke and the blood. Jarek raised his sword, and the world turned gold. A shaft of pure, brilliant, molten gold light lanced through the broken roof, through the swirling smoke, cutting the darkness like a blade. It came from above the storm clouds. It struck the stone floor between Jarek and Kayla, and then moved, bathing Kayla's laboring form in its radiance. The convergence. The three moons had aligned. In that transcendent light, Kayla gave one final, mighty push, and the first pup was born into a pool of gold and shadow. For a heartbeat, the entire world froze. The screaming wind, the groans of wounded men, the pounding of my own heart, all silenced by that column of celestial gold. It was as if the moon goddess herself had reached down through the storm and touched our wretched little cottage. In the heart of that light, the newborn pup lay still and slick on the cold stone. My healer's mind screamed at me, "Clear the airway, stimulate breathing," but my body was locked, caught between the terror of Jarek's raised sword and the awe of the divine light. The pup didn't move. A desperate, broken sound tore from Kayla's throat. It was more than a whine. It was a mother's soul fracturing. That sound broke the spell. Ignoring the sword, ignoring everything, I scrambled on hands and knees through the gore and debris. I scooped the tiny, wet body into my hands. It was so small, so perfectly formed, a miniature of its magnificent mother with a coat of soft gray down. But it was cold and still. "No," I breathed, my voice cracking. "No, please." I rubbed its little chest with my thumbs, willing life into it. I bent close, listening for a breath I knew wasn't there. The golden light pulsed around us, warming my skin, but doing nothing for the pup's chilling body. After everything, the poison, the flight, the battle, had it all been for this? A stillborn prophecy? A shadow fell over me. Jarek had recovered from his shock. His sword was still raised, his face a mask of cruel triumph. A dead pup. Fitting. The prophecy ends here. Now step away from the beast, healer. Your interference ends as well. I didn't move. I cradled the pup to my chest, my tears falling onto its fur. I had failed. Again. But then the golden light, it shifted. It wasn't just illuminating us anymore. It was gathering, concentrating, pouring into the pup like liquid starlight flowing into a vessel. The tiny body began to glow from within, and its chest gave a sudden shuddering leap. A gasp, tiny and wet, filled the air. Then another. The pup's eyes snapped open. They were not the blue of a newborn's eyes. They were pure, radiant gold, shining with an inner light that had nothing to do with the moonbeam. It looked up, not with the blank gaze of a new creature, but with a profound, ancient awareness. Its gaze swept the room, passing over my tear-streaked face, over Kayla's exhausted form, over the stunned soldiers, and finally settling on Commander Jarek. It opened its mouth, and instead of a mule, it made a sound, a resonant, humming vibration that seemed to exist more in the mind than in the air. It was a sound of pure seeing. Jarek took a step back, his confidence faltering. What sorcery is this? The answer came not from the pup, but from Kayla. With a groan of immense effort, she pushed again. The second pup slid into the world, caught in the fading edge of the golden light. It, too, was still for a terrifying moment before drawing a sudden, sharp breath. Its eyes opened, identical pools of glowing gold. Then the third, the smallest of the litter, born as the convergent beam began to thin and break apart. It gasped its first breath without pause, its golden eyes blinking open with an expression of startling curiosity. 3 pups, 3 sets of prophetic golden eyes. They moved with a coordination that defied nature. Still wet, still unsteady on their legs, they crawled towards each other, forming a small triangle. Then, as one, they turned those blinding eyes toward Commander Jarek and his men. The psychic hum grew louder, harmonizing into a single, focused note. And then they showed us. It wasn't a vision like before. It was an assault of truth. Images, feelings, memories that were not our own flooded the cottage, projected directly into our minds by the pup's newfound power. We saw Jarek taking a bag of gold from Valerius in a shadowy tavern. We felt his grim satisfaction as he poisoned Kaela's food. We heard his orders to the soldiers. No witnesses, not even the exile. We witnessed, through his own memory, the murder of an Omega scout who had stumbled upon a secret meeting, a quick knife in the dark, a body dropped into a ravine. But it didn't stop with Jarek. The pup's gaze swept the other soldiers. One saw his own hand setting fire to a cottage of a family who asked too many questions. Another felt the ghost of the rope he'd used to hang a dissenting farmer. The youngest soldier, barely more than a boy, relived the moment he stood guard while his comrades dragged a screaming woman into the woods. Their crimes, their betrayals, their hidden shames, all were laid bare in the brilliant, unforgiving light of the pup's gaze. It was a judgment more terrible than any court. The soldiers broke. One fell to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably, begging the ghosts of his victims for forgiveness. Another turned and fled blindly into the blizzard, his screams swallowed by the wind. The young one simply crumpled, catatonic, his mind unable to bear the weight of his revealed self. Only Jarek remained standing, but he was shaking, his face ashen. He clutched his head, trying to block out the visions. "Lies!" he roared, but his voice was thin, desperate. "Demon tricks!" The largest pup, the firstborn, took a wobbling step forward. It fixed its golden eyes on Jarek and let out a sharp, high sound, a single, psychic word that echoed in the silence left by the fading convergence. Traitor. The word held the weight of the poisoned princess, the murdered Omegas, the betrayed king. It held the image of Jarek's own loyal warhound, who he had loved as a pup, and later euthanized on Valerius's orders when it grew too old and too perceptive. Jarek's sword clattered to the floor. He stared at the pup, his defiance dissolving into something like horror. He looked at his own hands as if seeing the blood on them for the first time. In that moment of his shattered resolve, Kaela moved. Exhaustion, poison, blood loss, none of it mattered. A mother's fury gave her strength. She surged up from the floor, a massive, bloody shadow, and her jaws closed not on Jarek's throat, but on the arm that had raised the sword against her children. The sound of breaking bone was a sharp, final crack in the cottage. Jarek screamed, a raw, animal sound of pain, and stumbled back out into the blizzard, clutching his ruined arm. He vanished into the white chaos, a broken man fleeing his own truth. Silence descended, heavy and thick. The thorn vine traps lay still. The smoke cleared. The golden light from the pups faded to a soft, ambient glow in their eyes. The 3 of them crawled back to Kaela, nuzzling at her belly, seeking warmth and milk. I sat amidst the wreckage, my wounded arm throbbing, my body trembling from shock and adrenaline. I looked at Kyla, who was gently licking her newborns. I looked at the pups, their golden eyes now soft and sleepy. We had survived. Against poison, soldiers, and a royal conspiracy, we had survived. But as my heart began to slow, a colder truth settled in. Jarek had escaped. He would go straight to Valerius. He would tell him the pups lived. He would tell him the prophecy was awakened. And Valerius would not send a handful of soldiers next time. He would send an army. Kyla lifted her head, her amber eyes meeting mine. The psychic link between us, forged in battle and blood, hummed softly. She didn't send words, just a wave of grim understanding, and beneath it, a steely resolve. The battle in the cottage was over. The war for the kin? 200 miles to the south, in the heart of the Silvercrest Palace, King Alistair was dreaming. It was not a gentle dream. He stood on a wind-swept mountain peak, the blizzard tearing at his royal furs. Before him lay a shattered cottage door, and inside a scene from a nightmare. His beloved warhound, Kyla, his companion since they were youths, lay in a pool of blood, her breathing shallow. 3 tiny glowing forms huddled near her, and a woman, her face pale and fierce, stood guard with a bloody dagger, her eyes the color of storm clouds, holding a wound on her arm. He knew that face. It haunted him. Lyra, the healer he had exiled. A soldier in his own commander's armor raised a sword. Alistair tried to roar, to move, but he was a ghost in the dream. The sword descended toward Kyla. The woman, Lyra, threw herself in the way. Alistair jolted awake, a gasp ripping from his throat. He was in his council chamber, the heavy oak table solid under his clenched fists. The murmur of advisors discussing border tariffs faded into a distant buzz. "Your Majesty?" A smooth, concerned voice cut through his disorientation. "Lord Chancellor Valerius. Are you unwell? You look pale." Alistair blinked, the images seared onto the back of his eyelids. Kyla's pain, Lyra's defiance, the golden-eyed pups. It wasn't just a dream. It was a bond vision. Kyla was in mortal danger, and she was crying out to him across the miles. "Kyla," Alistair said, his voice rough. He pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loudly on the stone floor. "She's hurt, north, in the mountains." A ripple of confusion went around the table. Valerius's expression was a masterpiece of mild perplexity. "The warhound, sire? She is in the royal kennels, under treatment for a mild fever. I received the report this morning." A lie. Alistair felt it in his bones, in the fading echo of Kyla's psychic cry. Betrayal. The word from his dream echoed. "You are mistaken," Alistair said, his alpha tone leaving no room for argument. He was already striding toward the chamber doors. "Prepare my horse, the swiftest we have, and a contingent of the royal guard. We ride north within the hour." "Sire, this is most irregular," sputtered Master of Coin, Theron. "The storm season." "Now," Alistair commanded, the word cracking through the room like a whip. As he swept out, he caught the flicker in Valerius's eyes. Not concern, calculation, and a quick, almost imperceptible nod to Captain Silas, the newly appointed head of the king's personal guard. The ride was a torment. The vision replayed behind Alistair's eyes with every thunderous hoofbeat. He drove his stallion Orion mercilessly, using his alpha will to push the beast beyond endurance. The royal guard, led by the silent, efficient Captain Silas, struggled to keep pace. The blizzard howled around them, but Alistair followed a thread of psychic light only he could see. The frayed tether of their bond with Kyla, growing fainter, more desperate. Hurry, it seemed to pulse. Hurry. Hours blurred into an agony of cold and fear. When they finally found the lonely track leading to the exile's cottage, Alistair's heart stuttered. The scene outside was one of violence. Tracks of many boots, a body half buried in snow, one of his own soldiers, throat torn out, and the cottage door hanging from one hinge like a broken wing. He dismounted before Orion had fully stopped, snow crunching under his boots. "Kyella!" he bellowed, fear stripping his voice of all royalty. He barreled through the shattered doorway, and the world stopped. The cottage was a charnel house of smoke, blood, and the sweet rotten scent of nightshade silver. His eyes found Kyella first. She was alive. Thank the goddess she was alive. Lying on her side, panting, her flanks a mess of clotted blood and fresh wounds, and nursing at her belly 3 pups. Their eyes glowed at him as he entered, not the blue of newborns, but a luminous knowing gold. The prophecy pups. They were real. Then he saw the woman. Lyra knelt on the bloody stone floor, clutching a deep gash on her shoulder, her clothes soaked crimson. She was paler than the snow outside, her storm-cloud eyes wide with pain and shock as they focused on him. But she didn't cower. She shifted, ever so slightly, placing herself more squarely between him and Kyella, a wounded guardian protecting her charge. Memories crashed over him. Lyra in his throne room years ago, fierce and brilliant, diagnosing his sister's poisoning when no one else could. Lyra standing before the council, accusing shadows he'd been too busy to see. His own voice, tired and dismissive, accepting Valerius's counsel over her evidence. If the council has found her guilty of sedition, then the sentence stands. Exile. He had let them send her here to die. "They told me you were dead," he whispered, the words ash in his mouth. Lyra just stared, her breath coming in shallow hitches. She looked like a spirit, a vengeful ghost of his own failure. Alistair rushed forward, his kingly facade forgotten. He fell to his knees, his hands hovering over Kyella, assessing her wounds, feeling the poison's vile residue through their bond. "Who did this?" he growled, the alpha rage rising, hot and terrible. Lyra spoke then, her voice a ragged scrape. "Your commander, Jarek, on the orders of your chancellor, Valerius." Each word was a hammer blow. Before Alistair could process the accusation, a movement caught his eye. Captain Silas had entered the cottage with 4 guards. Silas's eyes were not on his king, nor on the injured. They were fixed on the pups, and in them, Alistair saw not awe, but a cold, assessing calculation. "Your Majesty," Silas said, his tone impeccably respectful, "this is a volatile situation. The hound may be rabid from her ordeal. The Omega is clearly dangerous. For your safety, please step back." A chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air slithered down Alistair's spine. Silas's hand rested on his sword hilt, the guards with him spread out,
the vision
not
had
facing
shown
the
him
door,
a soldier in
but
his own
facing
colors
him.
raising a sword.
Valerius's
He had assumed
man.
it was Jarek.
Of course.
What if the threat was closer? Alistair rose slowly to his feet, placing his own body between Silas and the wounded behind him. "My safety is not in question, Captain. The only danger I see is to them. Ride back to the capital. Fetch the royal physicians, now." For a heartbeat, Silas hesitated. The calculation in his eyes turned to a decision. "I'm afraid I cannot do that, sire." His voice lost all pretense of respect. "Lord Valerius's orders are clear. No witnesses to the hound's tragic end, including any who have been misguided by her." Betrayal upon betrayal. It was a knife to the gut. His own guard. "You serve Valerius," Alistair said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I serve the future of the kingdom," Silas replied, drawing his sword. The metallic ring was the only sound in the sudden, terrible silence. "A future you are too weak to secure. It's nothing personal, Your Majesty." The 4 guards drew their blades as one. Outnumbered, in a cramped space, with wounded to protect. Alistair's mind raced. He was a warrior king, but these were elite guards, and Silas was one of the best swordsmen in the realm. He had only one advantage. They thought he was alone. He was not. He looked at Lyra, exhausted, bleeding, but her eyes were clear. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. She understood. She was still a fighter. He looked at Kayla. Her amber eyes burned with fury. She tried to rise. And he looked at the 3 golden-eyed pups. They had stopped nursing. All 3 were watching Silas, their heads tilted. The glow in their eyes was intensifying, pulsing in time with Alistair's own pounding heart. The first pup, the largest, opened its mouth. The psychic hum returned, but this time it was focused, a blade being sharpened. Silas took a step forward. "Make it clean," he ordered his men. For the king, at least. The pup's hum became a psychic shout. "Liar!" Images erupted in the small space, not of past crimes this time, but of the present. The men saw their own future as Silas had painted it for them: riches, titles, power after the king's accidental death. They saw Silas's promise to make them lords, and they saw, oversupposed on that greed, the stark truth: their own corpses in a ditch once they were no longer useful, Valerius's cold smile as he gave the order. 2 of the guards faltered, their swords dipping, faces paling, but Silas and the other 2, harder men, shook off the vision with a snarl. "Kill them!" Silas roared, lunging. Alistair met his charge, their swords clashing in a shower of sparks. He was driven back a step by Silas's strength. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a guard move toward Lyra. She lunged, not with a sword, but with her bare hand, scattering a fistful of the silvery ash from the fire pit into his face. He screamed, blinded. The second loyal guard came at Alistair's flank. Alistair parried Silas's thrust and spun, but he was off balance. He wouldn't make it. And a gray blur shot past his legs. Kayla. She moved with the last dregs of her strength, her jaws closing on the guard's arm. Bone crunched. The man's scream was cut short as Alistair's pommel struck his temple. But it left him open. Silas saw his opening and thrust his blade straight at Alistair's heart. Time seemed to slow. Alistair saw the killing point coming. He saw Lyra's horrified face. He saw Kayla, too far away to help. And he saw the smallest pup, the one born last, tumble forward. It placed its tiny body directly in Silas's path, looked up, and its golden eyes flashed.
Silas didn't trip, he froze. His sword halted inches from Alistair's chest. His eyes went wide with an internal horror, seeing something only he could see. Perhaps his own end, perhaps the emptiness of Valerius's promises. For one crucial second, he was paralyzed by a truth so terrible it stole all will. A second was all Alistair needed. His own sword swept up in a reverse arc. The hilt connected with Silas's jaw with a sickening crack. The captain crumpled to the floor, unconscious. The remaining guard, seeing his captain fall and his comrades defeated, dropped his sword with a clatter and fled into the blizzard. Silence once more, thick with the smell of blood, smoke, and spent magic. Alistair stood panting, his sword dripping onto the stones. He looked at Lyra, who was swaying on her feet, her hand pressed to her bleeding shoulder. He looked at Kayla, who had collapsed back beside her pups, her flanks heaving. He looked at the 3 small, golden-eyed creatures who had just saved the life of their king. The battle was won. But as he stared at the treacherous form of Captain Silas on his floor, a new and more profound horror dawned. If his own captain was a traitor, how deep did Valerius's conspiracy go? Who else in his palace, in his council, in his very bedchamber, waited for him to return, smiling false smiles while holding hidden daggers? He was not riding back to a kingdom. He was riding back into a nest of vipers, and he had 2 gravely wounded souls and 3 miraculous pups to protect on the journey. The silence after the fight was a living thing, heavy with the scent of iron, smoke, and fear. Alistair stood over the fallen Captain Silas, his breath clouding in the freezing air, his mind reeling. The betrayal wasn't a single arrow shot from the shadows. It was the ground beneath his feet turning to quicksand. If the head of his personal guard served Valerius, then no one was safe. Not him, not his sister Alara, still convalescing in the palace. No one. He turned from the traitor to the true heart of the room. Lyra was sliding down the wall, her strength finally spent, leaving a smeared trail of blood on the stone. Kayella whined softly, nuzzling her pups, but unable to rise. The three little ones, their miraculous golden eyes now dim with exhaustion, huddled close to their mother. He was the Alpha King. He had to lead. "We cannot stay here," Alistair said, his voice cutting through the quiet. It was not the voice of a shocked man, but of a commander assessing a battlefield. "More will come. We must reach the capital." Lyra lifted her head, her storm-gray eyes dull with pain. "He controls the capital. You heard him. It's a trap." "It is my capital," Alistair growled, the words vibrating with a royal authority he had to force himself to feel. "And it is where my sister is, where the archives are, where I can root out this poison once and for all." He knelt before her, ignoring the blood. "I cannot do it alone. I need your testimony, and I need Kayella and her pups alive as proof of Valerius's treason." He saw the conflict in her eyes, the deep, ingrained instinct of an Omega to distrust the alpha power that had broken her, the survivalist who knew walking into the lion's den was madness, and beneath it, the healer who saw wounded creatures and a kingdom bleeding from an unseen wound. "You exiled me," she whispered, the words not an accusation, but a stark, painful fact. "I was blind," he admitted, the truth costing him more than any battle. "I cannot undo it, but I can fight for a kingdom where such a thing never happens again. Help me." He held out his hand, not as a king to a subject, but as one wounded soul to another. Lyra looked at his hand, then at Kayella and the pups. She looked at the bond that had already formed between them, the warhound who had chosen her, the miraculous creatures they had protected together. She was not just Lyra the exile anymore. She was a guardian of a living prophecy. Slowly, painfully, she placed her blood-stained hand in his. Her skin was ice cold. "For them," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of its old steel. "Not for you." "For them," he agreed. They worked with a frantic, focused energy. Alistair used strips torn from his own royal cloak to bind Lyra's shoulder wound and the worst of Kayla's gashes. He fashioned a sling from a blanket to carry the three pups, a warm, squirming bundle against his chest. Their golden eyes peered out, watchful and strange. Getting Kayla to her feet was a struggle that required all of Alistair's alpha strength and Lyra's stubborn encouragement. The great hound stood, swaying, her legs trembling, but the fire in her amber eyes was undimmed. She would make this journey or die trying. They left the cottage of blood and miracles behind. Alistair secured Silas and the one surviving cowed guard to their own horses, their hands bound. They would be crucial prisoners. The bodies of the fallen were left for the mountain. There was no time for burial. The journey south was a slow, agonizing procession through the relentless blizzard. Alistair led, his senses stretched to their limits, watching for ambush in every snow-shrouded copse. Lyra walked beside Kayla, one hand always resting on the hound's shoulder, a constant point of contact and comfort. The pups slept in their sling, their soft glow a small beacon in the white gloom. On the second night, as they took shelter in a shallow cave, Alistair finally asked the question burning in his mind. He fed a small, smokeless fire of dry moss as Lyra checked Kayla's bandages. "The prophecy," he said, his voice low. "What do the pups see?" Lyra didn't look up. "Truth. They see through lies, through masks, through intentions. When they looked at Yerrick, they showed him his own crimes. When they looked at Silas, they showed him the emptiness of his reward." She finally met his gaze across the tiny fire. What do you think they see when they look at you, Your Majesty?" The question was a challenge. He held her gaze, letting the firelight play between them. "I hope they see a king who failed, but who was trying to mend his failures. I hope they see a man who is afraid of how deep this betrayal goes, afraid of not being strong enough to cut it out." Lyra studied him for a long moment. The suspicion in her eyes softened just a fraction. She said quietly, "They also see your bond with Kayla. It shines to them, a thread of pure silver in all this darkness." She paused. "They see my anger at you, but they also see that I trust you with their lives right now. They understand complexity." "And Valerius?" Alistair asked, the name like a curse on the wind. Lyra's face hardened. They have not seen him directly, but through Kayla's memories, through the poison in her blood, they see a shadow that eats the light, a hunger for power that has no bottom. A cold deeper than the mountain night settled in Alistair's bones. He had grown up with Valerius as an uncle-like figure. The man had taught him statecraft, had steadied him after his father's death. To think of that mind, that calm voice, as a bottomless hunger, it made the world feel unstable. On the third day, the snows began to lessen. The jagged peaks gave way to frozen hills, and then to the familiar forests that bordered the capital plains. The sight of the distant spires of Silvercrest City, gleaming under a pale sun, should have brought relief. It brought only a tightening dread. They were approaching the nest of vipers. Alistair made a decision. He could not ride through the main gates with a bound captain of his guard, a notorious exile, a wounded royal hound, and 3 glowing pups. The news would reach Valerius before his horse had cooled. "There is a way," he said to Lyra. "The old postern gate in the eastern wall, near the ruined chapel. It's sealed, forgotten, but I know the mechanism. We can enter unseen, reach the royal quarters through the lower crypts." Lyra nodded, her trust in his plan a silent, powerful thing. They circled wide, avoiding the main roads, moving like ghosts through the barren winter fields. The postern gate was exactly as he remembered, overgrown with dead ivy, the iron rusted, but the hidden lever, carved to look like a knot in the stone, still worked with a grating shove. The small door swung inward on silent, well-oiled hinges. Someone had been using it. A fresh wave of paranoia hit him. Valerius knew all the palace's secrets. The crypts were a labyrinth of cold, dry air and the dust of centuries. Their footsteps echoed in the profound silence. The pups, awake now, peered from the sling, their golden eyes casting tiny pools of light on the stone walls, illuminating the carved faces of kings long dead. They seemed watchful, alert. They emerged into a forgotten servants' corridor behind the royal kitchens. The familiar smells of baking bread and roasting meat were a surreal contrast to their bloody journey. Alistair led them up narrow, winding stairs, through dusty, tapestry-hidden passages only the royal family knew. His goal was the sun and moon chamber, his private study, warded by old magic and loyal, ancient guards whose families had served the crown for generations. If any place in the palace was still safe, it was there. They were 2 turns away when they heard voices, polite, cultured voices, floating from an open courtyard below. "And the king's extended hunt is most concerning," Lord Chancellor Valerius was saying, his tone one of gentle worry. "With this northern unrest, his absence is a vulnerability. The council grows anxious." "Surely His Majesty knows what he's doing," replied a female voice Alistair recognized, Lady Eileen, a council member of wavering loyalty. Of course, Valerius soothed, but a king must also heed the wisdom of his council. For the stability of the realm, we must sometimes make difficult decisions in his stead. Preparations must be made." Preparations. The word hung in the air, oily and sinister. Alistair froze, pressing Lyra and Kyla back into the shadows of the passage.
he peered through a carved stone lattice. Below, in the snowy courtyard, Valerius stood with 3 other council members. He looked the same as ever, dignified, thoughtful, the very picture of loyal service. But Alistair, seeing him through the lens of betrayal and with the memory of the pup's vision, saw something else. The way his calm eyes missed nothing, the slight, controlled tension in his shoulders. The man was a spider at the center of a web, feeling every tremor. One of the pups in the sling let out a tiny, almost inaudible growl. Its golden eyes were fixed on Valerius below, glowing with a sudden, fierce intensity. It was seeing the shadow, the hunger. Valerius's head lifted a fraction as if he'd heard something. His gaze swept the upper galleries, passing directly over their hiding place. For a heartbeat, he was certain they were discovered. Then Valerius smiled, a benign, empty curve of his lips, and turned back to his conversation. Come, let us discuss the grain tariffs. We must attend to the kingdom's bread even as we pray for our king's safe return. The group moved away, their footsteps fading on the flagstones. Alistair let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They were inside the viper's nest, and the largest viper had just slithered past, unaware that the king he sought to replace was already home, and carrying with him the very means of the chancellor's destruction. But they were not safe yet. They had to reach the chamber, they had to secure the proof, and they had to decide when to strike, for striking too soon could be just as fatal as not striking at all. The intensity is unbearable. They're inside the palace, but Valerius is so close. Will they make it to the safe chamber unseen? What preparations is Valerius making? The plot thickens. Share your anxiety in the comments. To find out if they can expose the traitor before it's too late, stay tuned. Subscribe to Jacqueline Romance Library so you don't miss the next thrilling chapter. The silence after Valerius's footsteps faded was absolute, broken only by the frantic hammering of Alistair's own heart. He could feel the tension vibrating from Lyra beside him, a live wire of fear and fury. Kyla's low, barely audible growl rumbled through the stone floor beneath their feet. The 3 pups in the sling were utterly still, their golden eyes wide, fixed on the empty space where the shadow had stood. With a sharp gesture, Alistair led them forward, deeper into the secret arteries of the palace. The passages grew narrower, dustier, the air stale with disuse. These were the castle's forgotten veins, known only to kings, and apparently to the man who sought to become one. The thought that Valerius might know these roots too was a constant, chilling companion. Finally, they reached a seemingly blank wall of fitted stone. Alistair pressed a sequence of barely discernible seams. With a soft, grinding click, a section of the wall pivoted inward, revealing a sliver of warm, fire-lit bare. The sun and moon chamber. Relief, so profound it felt like a physical weakness, washed over him. They slipped inside, and he sealed the door behind them. The room was as he'd left it weeks before. A fire crackled in the great hearth, magically tended, a small luxury of his station. Shelves groaned with books and scrolls. Maps were spread across a large oak table. The air smelled of old parchment, cedar, and safety. For a moment, they all just stood there, breathing. Kayla immediately sank onto a thick rug before the fire with a shuddering sigh, her pups tumbling from the sling to nuzzle against her. Lyra leaned heavily against the door, her face ashen, her bandaged shoulder staining fresh crimson through the cloak. "We need to tend to your wound properly," Alistair said, moving to a carved cabinet and pulling out clean linen, salves, and a bottle of strong spirits. "Later," Lyra breathed, but her legs buckled. Alistair caught her before she hit the floor, easing her into a high-backed chair by the fire. Her skin was clammy, her eyes glassy with pain and exhaustion. The journey had taken a brutal toll. "Now," he insisted, his voice gentler than he intended. He knelt, carefully peeling back the blood-soaked makeshift bandage. The sword slash was angry and deep, but clean. He cleaned it with the spirits, ignoring her sharp intake of breath, and applied a pungent healing salve before wrapping it with expert precision. His hands, which had wielded a sword against traitors just hours ago, were steady and careful. She watched him, her stormy eyes unreadable. "You've done this before." "A king who cannot bind a wound is a poor leader of warriors," he said simply, tying off the bandage. Their eyes met over the finished work. The air between them shifted, charged with something more than urgency, of a recognition of shared ordeal, a fragile, hard-won trust. A soft whine broke the moment. One of the pups, the smallest, had wobbled over to Lyra's chair. It placed a tiny paw on her boot and looked up, its golden eyes soft. A wave of warmth, of gentle, healing energy pulsed from the tiny creature. Lyra's rigid posture eased slightly, some of the pain lines smoothing from her face. "They're healing me," she whispered, in awe. "They are full of wonders," Alistair said, watching the pup. Wonders that Valerius wanted to extinguish. The name was a dark cloud in the safe room. "We have proof. Silas is bound in the stables. Kayla's wounds bear the mark of nightshade silver. You are a witness, but it is not enough." Lyra frowned. "What more do you need? The word of a king?" "The word of a king who was blind for years?" Alistair shook his head, a bitter smile touching his lips. "Valerius has had years to weave his lies, to place his people, to compromise the council. If I accuse him openly with only our testimony, he will spin it. He will say you bewitched me, that Kayla's pups are monsters, that Silas acted on his own. It could spark a civil war within these very walls." He paced before the fire, the weight of kingship settling back onto his shoulders, heavier now with knowledge. "We need irrefutable evidence, evidence that cannot be twisted, evidence that speaks for itself to every neutral lord and frightened council member." "The archives," Lyra said suddenly, sitting up straighter. "When I was investigating the Omega illnesses, I found records, medical ledgers, supply orders, patterns. I was gathering them to present to you when I was arrested. They took everything, but the originals must still be in the master clerk's vault. If we could find the orders for Nightshade Silver, signed by him, or records of the treatments for the Omegas who died." Alistair's eyes lit with a fierce hope. That would be it, a paper trail, cold, hard facts in his own hand. Then his shoulders slumped. "The vault is in the heart of the administrative wing, guarded day and night, and Valerius will have his own eyes on it." "Then we don't walk in the front door," Lyra said, a flicker of her old defiance returning. "You know this palace. There must be another way." Alistair thought, his mind racing through blueprints of stone and memory. "There is. The old laundry chutes from the royal apartments. They were sealed when the new kitchens were built, but the shafts remain. They run behind the vault wall. It's a tight fit and dangerous, but—" "I am smaller than you," Lyra finished, "and I have spent 6 months learning to move unseen." He stared at her. "You are injured, and you are the king. You cannot disappear into a wall. Kayla cannot go. The pups cannot go." She met his gaze squarely. "It has to be me." The thought of sending her, wounded and exhausted, into the bowels of the palace on a task more dangerous than any battlefield made his chest tighten. But she was right. He hated that she was right. "We rest until nightfall," he conceded, his voice tight. "You eat, you sleep. Then we try." The hours passed with agonizing slowness. Alistair sent a psychic pulse through his bond with Kayla, a simple, reassuring signal that they were safe for now. He knew his sister, Ilara, would sense Kayla's return and his own proximity. He prayed that she would have the sense to stay quiet, to act normally. Lyra slept fitfully in the chair by the fire, the smallest pup curled in her lap like a living, golden ember. Alistair pored over maps and council rolls, identifying Valerius's likely allies, marking the names of those who might still be loyal. The list of allies was distressingly long, the list of loyalists distressingly short. When full dark had settled over the city, they prepared. Lyra changed into dark, close-fitting clothes from a servant's stash Alistair kept for emergencies. She moved stiffly, but her eyes were clear and focused. He led her to a panel in his bedroom, hidden behind a tapestry of the first king.
The opening revealed a sheer, dark drop, smelling of old soap and damp stone. A knotted rope was secured to an iron ring. "The chute descends 3 levels," Alistair whispered, handing her a small hooded lantern with a shutter to control the light. "At the bottom, you will see a grate. It opens into a crawl space behind the vault room. The wall is old mortar. You should be able to loosen a stone and see inside. Find the evidence. Do not take it. They will notice its absence. Memorize the location, the exact wording, then return." Lyra nodded, her face pale but set. She tied the lantern to her belt and gripped the rope. "Lyra," Alistair said, his hand catching hers. Her skin was cold. "If anything feels wrong, if you hear anything, you come back immediately. The evidence is not worth your life." She looked at their joined hands, then back at him. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "It is worth the kingdom's life and the pups. I'll be back." And she was gone, disappearing into the blackness of the chute, the sound of her descent fading into silence. Alistair stood there for a long time, listening to nothing. The emptiness of the room was suddenly vast. He returned to the sun and moon chamber. Kayla lifted her head, whining softly. "She is brave," the hound's psychic voice brushed his mind. "She is," Alistair agreed silently, sinking into a chair to wait. "We all must be now." Time became a form of torture. Every creak of the old palace, every distant shout from the yards sent his heart racing. He imagined 100 horrors: Lyra caught by guards, the grate being sealed, Valerius himself waiting in the dark vault. An hour passed, then 2. He was beginning to consider the unthinkable, going after her himself, when the panel in the bedroom scraped softly. He was there in an instant. Lyra hauled herself out of the chute, covered in grime and cobwebs, her breath coming in ragged gasps. But her eyes blazed with triumph. "You found it," he breathed, helping her up. "More than I hoped for," she panted, leaning against him for support. "The vault, it's not just records. There's a ledger, a private ledger in a hidden compartment, Valerius's personal accounts. Payments to assassins, orders for poisons, shipments of weapons to a private garrison in the Weston Woods, and the nightshade silver was requisitioned by him a week before Kayla fell ill, signed with his chancellor's seal. Cold, hard facts. A map of treason. "This is it," Alistair said, vindication and fury warring within him. "With this, we can—" A sound from the main chamber door froze the words in his throat. Not a knock, a soft, precise scratching, like a key probing a lock. Then a voice, polite and deadly calm, called through the thick oak. "Your Majesty, this is Captain Ryland of the Palace Scullard. We have reports of a disturbance in this wing. May we enter to ensure your safety?" It was not Captain Ryland's voice. It was a voice Alistair knew well, one that had just hours ago spoken of preparations in the snowy courtyard. It was Valerius. The polite scratching at the door felt like a dagger drawn slowly across Alistair's nerves. Valerius's voice, muffled by the thick oak, was a chilling parody of concern. Alistair's mind went cold and sharp. They had minutes, perhaps seconds. His eyes locked with Lyra's. In her grime-streaked face, he saw the same calculated panic. The evidence was in her mind, not on paper. They couldn't be caught here, with her fresh from the vaults, with Kayla and the pups in plain sight. He pointed silently to the largest tapestry in the room, a woven scene of the first hunt. Behind it, he knew, was a shallow priest's hole, a relic from more turbulent times. Lyra nodded instantly. She moved to Kayla, whispering urgently, pushing the great hound towards the wall. Kayla understood, nudging her pucks before her. With a rustle of fabric, they vanished behind the heavy weave. Alistair swept the room with a glance. The second chair by the fire was still warm. He righted the one Lyra had used, smoothed the rug where Kayla had lain. He grabbed a book at random and threw himself into his own chair, adopting a casual study just as the scratching turned into a firm, insistent knock. "Your Majesty, I must insist, for your security." Alistair took a breath, willing his heartbeat to slow. He let a thread of royal irritation into his voice. "Enter."
The door swung open. Not Captain Rylan, but Lord Chancellor Valerius himself stepped through, followed by 4 palace guards in full regalia. Valerius was the picture of dignified relief. He wore a robe of deep sapphire, his silver hair perfectly combed, his face a mask of solicitous worry that didn't reach his frozen sky eyes. "Thank the heavens," Valerius breathed, performing a shallow bow. "When the guards reported unfamiliar sounds in the secret passages, we feared an assassin had found to your chambers. You are well?" "I am perfectly well, Chancellor," Alistair said, not rising from his chair. He kept his tone cool, bored. "A restless night in Old Castle. The wind plays tricks in the stones. You have interrupted my reading." Valerius's gaze swept the room like a hunting hawk's. It lingered on the dying fire, the 2 chairs, the slightly disturbed rug. It flicked to the closed door of the bedchamber. "Of course, sire. My apologies. But with your prolonged absence and the tensions in the realm, we cannot be too careful." He took a step further into the room. "You returned alone from your hunt? We saw no party at the gates." "A test. A delicate probe." "I entered through the postern," Alistair said flatly. "I wished for quiet. My hunt was unsuccessful, and my mood is not for fanfare." "Ah," said Valerius, the sound too understanding. His eyes continued their inventory. They landed on a smudge of dark earth on the stone floor near the hearth, mud from the mountain trail, tracked in and missed in their haste. His gaze sharpened. "The palace seems to have disturbed you more than the hunt, Your Majesty. You even tracked in the winter mud. Please, allow me to call a servant to clean that." It was a tiny thing, a nothing, but in that moment it was a crack in their facade. Valerius knew Alistair was fastidiously clean. He knew something was wrong. "Leave it," Alistair commanded, his voice dropping into a lower register, the alpha tone meant to end discussion. Valerius didn't flinch. He smiled, a thin, cold curve of his lips. "As you wish." He paused, his head tilting. "It is curious, though. The guards also reported a scent, a most distinctive scent, of wet wolf and blood, and something else, something like ozone after lightning strike, almost magical, here in this very wing." He was sniffing the air, subtly. He wasn't just looking, he was using the heightened senses his own noble bloodline afforded him. He could smell Kayla, he could smell the pup's strange power, he could smell Lyra's fear and blood. The game was up. Alistair slowly closed his book and placed it on the table. He rose to his full height, his presence filling the room. "What is your true purpose here, Chancellor?" The Chancellor's polite mask slipped just at the edges. The worry vanished, replaced by a calm, analytical coldness. "To see with my own eyes, Your Majesty. Rumors have a way of taking flight even in a snowstorm. Rumors of a king riding north in a frenzy. Rumors of a disgraced healer seen in the foothills. Rumors of miraculous births." He glinted. "I came to see if the rumors were true, and to offer counsel." "Counsel?" Alistair's hand drifted to where his sword would normally hang. He was unarmed in his own study. "Yes, the kingdom is uneasy. The appearance of aberrations, creatures of unstable magic, would frighten the people. The reappearance of a condemned criminal would undermine the law, and a king who championed such things," he sighed, a sound of profound, fake regret. "It could be seen as a weakening of the mind. The council is already concerned for your judgment after your sudden departure." The threat was now naked. Valerius was laying the groundwork to declare him unfit, to seize the regency. "My judgment," Alistair said, taking a step forward, "is finally clear. Clear enough to see a traitor standing before me." The guards behind Valerius tensed, their hands going to their swords. Valerius simply raised a slender hand to calm them. "Traitor? A strong word, sire, from a king who harbors fugitives and monsters." His gaze shot to the tapestry. "You really should have chosen a hiding place with better airflow. The scent is quite concentrated there." He knew. Alistair moved. He didn't go for a weapon he didn't have. He moved to place himself between Valerius and the tapestry. "You will leave this chamber, now." I think not, Valerius said softly. He nodded to his guards. Secure the king, for his own protection, and search the room. There are dangerous elements that must be contained. The guards advanced, and the tapestry erupted. It wasn't torn aside, it was blown inward by a surge of raw golden energy. Caleb burst forth, not with a snarl, but with a silent, terrifying fury, her body moving with a speed that belied her wounds. She knocked the first guard sideways into a bookcase with a crash of splintering wood. But it was the pups. All three emerged, not wobbling now, but moving with a terrible, synchronized purpose. They placed themselves in a line before the advancing guards. Their golden eyes were not soft or curious. They were incandescent, blinding. The psychic hum returned, but this time it was not a single note. It was a chorus, a symphony of truth so loud it was silent. The vision they projected wasn't of past crimes, it was of now, of this very moment. The guards didn't see loyal soldiers protecting the chancellor. They saw themselves through the pup's eyes, as pawns. They felt the phantom pain of the knife he would eventually put in each of their backs when they were no longer useful. They saw the future he offered. Not glory, but a shallow grave. Two guards cried out, dropping their swords, clutching their heads, as the brutal, unwanted truth invaded their minds. They stumbled back, broken. But the third guard, a man with dead eyes and a scar across his cheek, was made of sterner, more fanatical stuff. He shook off the psychic assault with a roar of anger and charged, not at the pups, but past them, his sword aimed at the heart of the tapestry, where Lyra must be hiding. He never made it. A blur of gray and pain intercepted him. Lyra. She hadn't stayed hidden. She launched herself from behind the tapestry with Alistair's silver-chased dagger in her good hand. She wasn't a trained warrior, but she was desperate and precise. She didn't try to parry the sword. She dropped low under his swing, and her dagger found the gap at his knee, just as she had in the cottage. The guard screamed, his leg buckling. Alistair was there in the next instant, delivering a crushing blow that rendered him unconscious. Silence again, but this time it was the silence after a storm. Two guards were cowering by the door. One was unconscious on the floor. Valerius stood alone in the center of the room, his composure, finally, truly shattered. He stared at the three pups, whose eyes were now fixed solely on him. The golden light bathed his face, revealing every line, every flicker of panic he could no longer hide. "Abominations!" he hissed, taking a step back. "No," Alistair said, his voice like granite. "They are justice." He looked at the pups and gave a single, slow nod. The trio focused. The light from their eyes didn't just glow, it lanced out, wrapping around Valerius like ropes of pure revelation. He stiffened, a gasp tearing from his throat. He was not shown the future, he was shown the past. His past, not as he remembered it, polished and justified, but as it truly was. He saw himself as a young, ambitious lord, resentful of the old king's strength. He felt the cold thrill of administering the first, slow dose of poison to his monarch. He relived the smug satisfaction of manipulating the young, grieving Prince Alistair.
He experienced again the clinical cruelty of ordering the deaths of gifted Omegas, not as a necessary evil, but as a gardener pruning weeds. He tasted the bitter jealousy as he looked at Kyla's bond with the king, a loyalty he could never buy. And he saw, with horrifying clarity, his own end, not as a powerful regent, but as a reviled name scratched from history, his legacy one of ashes and infamy. Valerius didn't scream. He made a small, choked sound, like a drowning man. He fell to his knees, not in submission, but because his legs would no longer hold him. He stared at nothing, his eyes wide and empty, his mind collapsing under the weight of his own unmasked soul. "The shadow sees itself," Lyra whispered, watching in horrified fascination. Alistair walked to the broken man, looking down at the ruin of his once trusted advisor. There was no victory in it, only a profound, weary sadness. "Lord Chancellor Valerius," Alistair pronounced, his voice echoing in the stunned room. You are under arrest for high treason, attempted regicide, murder, and conspiracy against the kingdom. The evidence of your crimes is known to me and will be presented to the full council." He turned to the 2 remaining guards who were trembling by the door. "Take him to the black cells. Guard him with your lives. Lives you still have only by the grace of these abominations." The guards, shamed and terrified, scrambled to obey, hauling the catatonic Valerius to his feet and dragging him away. When the door shut, the tension snapped. Lyra sagged against the wall, the dagger slipping from her fingers. Kyella limped to her pups, nuzzling them worriedly. The pups' golden light faded to a gentle glow, and they blinked, looking suddenly like very tired, very ordinary puppies. Alistair walked to Lyra. "You were supposed to stay hidden." "He was going for them," she said simply, nodding toward the tapestry. "I couldn't." He looked at her, bloody, grimy, defiant, and more loyal than any knight in his hall. "Thank you," he said, the words inadequate for the debt he owed. She met his gaze, and for the first time the storm in her eyes cleared completely, leaving something quieter, more resilient. "The evidence. He's finished, isn't he?" Alistair looked at the door through which the shadow had been dragged. "He is. But his conspiracy is a weed with deep roots. Uprooting it will take time, and it will be dangerous." He looked at her, at Kyella, at the 3 sleepy, miraculous pups. The battle in the chamber was won, but the war for the soul of Silvercrest was just beginning. It turned its head, its golden eyes settling on Alistair. A soft, questioning chirp emerged, not psychic but vocal. Then it sent a gentle pulse, not of truth but of suggestion. An image formed in Alistair's mind, his sister, Princess Alara, sitting in her sunlit solar, weaving a tapestry. Her face was pale but determined, her eyes the same clear blue as his own. Around her was a faint silver nimbus of loyalty, untouched by shadow. "Ilara," Alistair breathed. Of course, his sister, who had been Valerius's first target, who owed her life to Lyra's forbidden magic. Her loyalty was absolute, and she was inside the palace, likely under watch but not yet a prisoner. She can be our eyes, our voice in the court. And the pups. Lyra looked at the 3 creatures, who were now clambering over a drowsy Kayla. "They are the key. They can see the truth in anyone. We don't need to accuse, we just need to introduce." A dangerous, brilliant plan began to form. They couldn't arrest half the council, but they could expose them, one by one, in a controlled setting, using the one witness whose testimony could not be denied. The next week was a delicate dance performed on a knife's edge. Alistair announced that the king had returned from his hunt weary and would be taking private counsel in the sun and moon chamber for a time, recovering from a mild illness. It was a believable lie. He sent for his sister. Princess Ilara arrived, her steps quiet, her lady-in-waiting a stern-faced woman Alistair knew to be from a family that hated Valerius. When Ilara saw Lyra, her composure broke for a second. She crossed the room in a rush of silk and took Lyra's hands. "They told me you were dead," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "I never believed it. I owe you my life." "And I need your help to save the kingdom," Lyra replied, squeezing her hands. They told Ilara everything: the poisoning, the prophecy, the pups, Valerius's unmasking. Ilara listened, her face hardening from gentle princess to steel-willed ally. "He always made my skin crawl," she said with a shudder, a smile that never warmed his eyes. "What do you need me to do?" Their plan was simple in design, complex in execution. Ilara would begin hosting small, private gatherings in her royal apartments, tea with a few council members' wives, poetry readings with minor nobles, innocuous events. Alistair, as the recovering king, would make brief, unexpected appearances at these gatherings, accompanied by a single, newly acquired pet, a sweet, fluffy warhound pup with distractingly beautiful golden eyes. The first test was Lady Eileen, the council member they had seen with Valerius in the courtyard. She arrived for tea, nervous and fluttering, her loyalty shifting sand. Alistair entered halfway through, the largest pup cradled sleepily in his arms. "Sister, forgive my intrusion. I was taking this little one for an airing." He smiled, the picture of a doting new pet owner. The pup, sensing its role, blinked awake, its golden eyes fixed on Lady Eileen. It didn't growl, it just looked. And in that look, Alistair and Lyra, watching from a hidden alcove, saw through the psychic bond they shared with Kayla what the pup saw. They saw Eileen's fear, not guilt of murder, but the greasy guilt of compromise. She saw Valerius's promises of protection for her son, who had gambling debts. She saw herself nodding along to his schemes, not out of belief, but out of cowardice. She was not a root of the shadow, she was a leaf trembling in its wind. Later, through Alara, a message was discreetly sent to Lady Eileen. "The king knows of your son's troubles. The crown will assume his debts. Your loyalty is now to the crown alone." Eileen became their first tearfully grateful informant, providing names and dates of minor meetings. They repeated the process. Lord Brennus, master of trade, was revealed to be embezzling on a massive scale, his greed a gateway for Valerius's control. Confronted privately with the pup's unwavering gaze and a few key figures mentioned by Eileen, he broke down and offered to turn over ledgers detailing Valerius's smuggling operations in exchange for exile over execution. Each encounter was a risk. Each revelation was a piece of the map. They identified the true believers, like the venomous master of laws, who have personally drafted the orders for Omega relocation, and the merely compromised. They built a web of understanding, of who could be turned and who needed to be removed. But the shadows fought back. One evening, a fire broke out in the archives wing, a convenient accident that destroyed 3 shelves of tax records, records that might have contained discrepancies Lyra hadn't seen yet. A loyal guardsman, one of the few Alistair had personally promoted, was found dead in an alley, his throat cut made to look like a robbery. He had been asking questions about the garrison in the western woods. Then, the attempt on the pups. It happened in the royal gardens at twilight. Lyra was walking with the 3 of them, letting them explore the frost-rimed hedges under Kayla's watchful eye. An arrow fletched with raven feathers hissed from the roof of the old armory. It was aimed with deadly accuracy at the cluster of golden-eyed fur. Kayla moved faster than sight, her body a shield. The arrow thudded into Kayla's shoulder, a glancing blow thanks to her speed, but it drew blood. A second arrow followed, but Lyra had already thrown herself over the pups, a wild cry on her lips. The would-be assassin escaped into the maze of rooftops. The message was clear. The conspiracy was not headless. It had teeth, and it would strike at the heart of their hope. That night, in the sun and moon chamber, the mood was bleak. Kayla's wound minor, but the attack had shaken them all. The pups huddled close, their usual playful energy subdued. "We are picking leaves while the branch still grows," Alistair said, pacing before the fire. "We need to find the trunk, the source of his power now that he sits in a cell." Lyra, rebandaging Kayla's shoulder, paused. "The ledger, in the vault, it mentioned shipments to the western woods, a private garrison. Valerius wouldn't keep an army just for show. He'd keep a successor, a figurehead, someone to put on the throne once he cleared the way." Ilara, who was sorting through the names of compromised nobles, looked up. "He has no children, but he has a nephew, Corvin. He's a distant cousin to our line. Slight claim to the throne, but a claim nonetheless. He's been traveling the southern estates for the past year." A cold certainty settled in Alistair's gut. The puppet, the pretty, pliable face for the coup. The garrison in the woods wasn't just a threat, it was the blade of the guillotine, waiting to fall the moment Valerius gave the signal from his cell or from beyond the grave. "We need to find that garrison," Alistair said. We need to know its size, its location, and we need to find Corvin. We can't send the army, Lyra said. If there are loyal officers left, we'd be tipping our hand. It has to be a small group, a stealth mission. Alistair looked at her, then at Kayla, and then at the 3 pups who had begun to chew on the fringe of a rug, their golden eyes glowing in the firelight. A small group, a healer, a king, a warhound, and 3 infant truth-seers. It was madness, but it was the only move they had. Then we go to the woods, Alistair said, his voice final. We find this serpent's nest and we cut off its head before it can strike. The safe room was no longer safe. The palace was a gilded cage of hidden knives. To save the kingdom, they would have to leave its walls and walk directly into the shadow's strongest lair. The decision to leave was made in the deep silence of the palace's sleeping hours. They couldn't afford the noise of a royal departure, the questions, the eyes. Alistair left sealed orders with Alara, to be opened only if they did not return in 7 days. They contained the names of the loyal few, the location of the evidence, and instructions to flee the capital with the pups if the shadow rose. It felt like leaving a child to guard a treasure hoard, but Alara had kissed his cheek, her eyes dry and fierce. I am not the frightened girl he poisoned anymore, brother. I will hold the line here. Their party was a ghost of what a royal expedition should be. Alistair, in hunter's leathers with a plain, heavy cloak. Lyra, her shoulders stiff but healing, dressed in similar practical clothes, her healer's kit and silver dagger at her belt. Kayla, moving with a slight, persistent limp from the arrow wound, her amber eyes scanning every shadow. And the 3 pups carried in a modified pack on Alistair's back, their curious golden eyes peering out from under the flap. They slipped from the city the same way they had entered, through the forgotten postern gate, melting into the pre-dawn gloom of the winter barren fields. Their destination was the Blackwood, a dense, mist-shrouded forest in the western foothills, a place of old tales and older secrets. The journey took 2 days of hard, cautious travel. They avoided roads, slept in cold camps without fire, and moved under the cover of weather that shifted from sleet to a brittle, freezing fog. The pups were strangely quiet, as if sensing the gravity of their mission. Only the middle one, the most thoughtful, would occasionally send a soft psychic pulse, a warning of a distant patrol, a hint of a hidden ravine. Their prophetic sight was becoming a practical tool, a compass pointing toward hidden danger. On the evening of the 2nd day, they reached the edge of the Blackwood. The trees were ancient and close, their branches weaving a canopy that choked out the gray sky. The silence here was different, not peaceful, but watchful, oppressive. This is the place, Alistair murmured, consulting a rough map drawn from the fragments of information they'd gathered. The garrison should be in a valley deep within, near the old stone circle. They entered the wood. The world narrowed to the path before them, the sound of their breath, the crunch of frost underfoot. Kayla's nose was to the ground, then to the air, her ears swiveling constantly. The pups in the pack grew still, their collective attention focused ahead. It was the smallest pup who gave the first true warning, a sharp, psychic jab, like a needle of light. Metal, many, heartbeats. Alistair froze, holding up a fist. They melted behind the thick bole of a fallen oak. Moments later, a patrol of 4 men in mismatched, weather-stained armor passed within 20 paces. They moved with a disciplined quiet that spoke of military training, but their insignias had been torn off. Mercenaries, the Larius's private army. They waited until the sounds of the patrol faded, then moved on, slower now, every sense stretched taut. The forest began to slope downward into a shallow, hidden valley, and there, through a screen of skeletal birch trees, they saw it. It wasn't a crude camp. It was a small, fortified village. Log palisades formed a defensive wall. Smoke rose from dozens of well-made chimneys. They could see barracks, a smithy, a training yard where figures drilled even in the fading light. This was no bandit hideout. This was a professional military outpost, housing at least 200 men. Lyra's heart sank. We can't fight this. We're not here to fight, Alistair whispered, his eyes calculating. We're here to see, to confirm, and to find Corvin. They found a vantage point on a rocky outcrop overlooking the compound. As dusk painted the sky in bruised purples, they observed. They saw the routines, the changing of the guard, the delivery of supplies from a well-used track leading south. They saw a man in finer clothes, a commander, address the troops. And then, as lanterns were lit in the largest central lodge, they saw him. A young man stepped onto the porch, accepting a goblet from a servant. He was handsome in a polished, bloodless way, with Valerius's pale hair and the weak chin. He wore the rich and practical clothing of a courtier, not a warrior. He surveyed his domain with a smug, proprietary air. Corvin, the puppet heir. Seeing him made the threat horrifically real. Here was the smiling face that would be placed on the throne after Alistair's tragic accident or declaration of madness. A compliant figurehead behind whom Valerius's loyalists would rule. We have what we came for, Alistair said, his voice taut with suppressed rage. Proof of a standing, unauthorized army and the pretender. We return to the capital, rally the loyal houses, and crush this. But as they turned to begin their careful retreat, the largest pup, still in the pack, let out a low, distressed whine. It wasn't a sound of fear, but of urgency. It pushed a new image into their shared awareness. Not of the camp below, of a different part of the forest, to the north, a steep, rocky gully, and in that gully, the psychic impression of pain, of despair, of many heartbeats, weak and fading. Lyra gripped Alistair's arm. What is that? He frowned, consulting his mental map. Nothing. A dead-end ravine, not on any scout report. The pups, all three now, focused on that distant point. Their golden light, usually internal, pulsed faintly against the pack's fabric. They were pushing, insisting. They see something we need to see, Lyra said, conviction hardening her voice. Against all tactical sense, they changed course. Moving with even greater stealth, they skirted the edge of the Garrison Valley and headed north towards the gully. The terrain grew rougher, the air colder. A sickly sweet smell, faint at first, grew stronger. The smell of decay and unwashed bodies. The gully was a deep, narrow crack in the earth, hidden by a thick growth of thorny brambles. From above it looked like a natural trap, but as they crept to the edge and peered down, the truth revealed itself, and it was worse than any battlefield. It was a prison pit. Crude wooden cages and ragged tents were crammed into the narrow space. Below, figures huddled around meager fires, their clothes thin and filthy. Guards patrolled the rim above, crossbows casually held. But these weren't soldiers or criminals. They were Omegas. Dozens of them, men, women, some frighteningly young. Their faces were hollow from hunger and hopelessness. Lyra's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. She saw familiar faces, mothers from the capital who had vanished, healers from outlying villages who had spoken against Valerius's policies.
This was the other half of Valerius's plan, not just eliminating gifted bloodlines, but collecting them, containing them, a ready pool of hostages, of forced labor, of souls to be bargained with or broken. This gully was the Shadow's larder. A rage, white-hot and pure, erupted in Lyra's chest. It burned away the last of her fear, the last of her pain. These were her people, the people she had tried and failed to save, and here they were, discarded like refuse in a hole. Alistair saw her expression. He felt the same fury, but tempered by the cold weight of strategy. "We cannot free them now," he whispered, his voice pained. "There are too many guards. It would alert the entire garrison. They would be slaughtered." "We can't leave them,"
Lyra hissed back, tears of fury in her eyes. "We won't," Alistair promised, his gaze sweeping the horrific scene, committing it to memory. "But we must be smart. This changes everything. It isn't just about a coup. It's about eradication. We now know his ultimate goal. We have his army, his heir, and his victims." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the dying light. "We have the full truth, and now we will use it to destroy him utterly." They retreated from the gully's edge, the image of the Omega prison pit seared behind Lyra's eyelids like a brand. It was the nightmare she had tried to warn the kingdom about, made horrifically real. They huddled in a shallow cave a safe distance from the gully, the cold seeping into their bones, but a fiercer cold had settled in her soul, the cold of a resolve that would accept no failure. Alistair stated again, his voice low and grim. He was sketching in the dirt with a stick, outlining the palisade, the gully, the patrol routes. 200 trained men against us. It's suicide, and it gets the prisoners killed. "Then we don't storm it," Lyra said, her mind racing over the herbs in her kit, the layout of the land, the behavior they'd observed. "We undermine it. We turn its own strength against it." She pointed to his crude drawing. "They get their water from that stream that cuts through the eastern wall, right? And their supplies come from the southern track." Alistair's eyes narrowed, following her thought. "You're thinking of poison. It would affect the prisoners, too, and it's not reliable." "Not poison," Lyra shook her head. "Sleep. A powerful, concentrated sedative made from blackroot and dreamwort. I have both. We introduce it upstream at a calculated time. It won't kill, but it will make them slow, groggy, confused." She looked at Kayla, then at the pups. "While they're stumbling, we create chaos, a distraction at the main gate, something that draws most of the garrison." "And then?" Alistair prompted, a spark of hope igniting in his eyes. "Then a small team goes over the wall at the blind spot near the gully, frees the Omegas, gets them out through the forest on the northern path we scouted." She met his gaze. "It's a gamble. It requires perfect timing. It requires the sedative to work, and it requires the distraction to be spectacular." Alistair looked at the 3 pups who were watching them intently. "The distraction," he mused. "It needs to be something they cannot ignore, something that speaks of a direct, overwhelming threat." A slow, fierce smile touched his lips. "Something like the sudden appearance of their king, declaring their treason before the entire camp with a royal warhound at their side." Lyra's breath caught. "You would walk into the middle of them. Alistair, that's the only thing that will pull every eye, every soldier to the front gate. They will see me, hear my voice, know their conspiracy is exposed. In their confusion from the sedative, they will either surrender or try to capture me. Either way, their attention will be absolute." He placed a hand on Kayla's head. "We will do it together, as we always have." Kayla let out a soft woof of agreement, nuzzling his hand. "And what about them?" Lyra asked, nodding to the pups. "They go with you," Alistair said firmly. "They are the key to finding the prisoners in the dark, to calming them, to guiding them out. Their light can be a beacon in the forest. And," he hesitated, "if the distraction fails, if I am captured, you must get them and the Omegas to Alara. The pups are the kingdom's future proof. You are their guardian." The weight of the plan settled over them, terrifying and magnificent. It was a symphony of risk, each movement dependent on the other. They spent the next day in frantic, silent preparation. Lyra brewed her sedative in a small, concealed hollow, concentrating the essence into a thick, odorless paste. She packed it into porous leather bladders that would slowly seep into the stream. Alistair scouted the exact point for the distraction, a rise of ground just before the main gate where his voice would carry. He practiced the words in his mind, the tone of absolute, unshakable royal authority. As dusk fell on the 3rd day, they moved into position. The air was frigid, the sky a tapestry of early stars. It was now or never. Lyra, with the pups in their pack, and Kayla, made their way to the upstream point. The largest pup, peering out, sent a confirming pulse. Guard, sleeping. The sentry by the water intake was dozing against a tree. Perfect. Lyra secured the bladders among the rocks in the swift, icy current, where they would dissolve over the next hour. She then turned and with Kayla began the tense, silent circuit to the northern blind spot in the palisade. The pups were eerily quiet, their combined focus a tangible pressure in the air. At the designated time, Alistair took a deep breath, drawing his sword. He didn't buckle on his royal armor. He stood in his hunter's leathers, but he drew himself up to his full height, letting the mantle of kingship settle upon his shoulders. He walked out of the tree line and onto the rise before the garrison's main gate. The guards on the wall, already feeling the first creeping tendrils of lethargy from the tainted water, blinked sluggishly at the solitary figure.
"You there, halt!" one called, his voice slurred. Alistair ignored him. He filled his lungs with the cold night air and spoke. His voice was not a shout, but a deep, resonant projection that rolled across the compound like thunder, amplified by the natural bowl of the valley and his own alpha power. "Men of the Blackwood garrison, hear the voice of your king." Heads turned, figures stumbled out of barracks, and the commander's lodge a lamp flared. The effect was immediate. The sheer audacious presence of the king they were conspiring against was a shockwave. "You have been lied to, deceived by the traitor Valerius, who now rots in my dungeon. You are not rebels for a just cause. You are tools of a murderer, a poisoner, a man who cages innocent Omegas in a pit like animals." Murmurs of confusion and denial rippled through the gathering crowd of soldiers. Some shook their heads, trying to clear the unnatural fog. The commander, a burly man with a scarred face, emerged onto the wall walk. "Seize him!" he roared, but his command lacked its usual force. "He's alone, a madman." "Am I?" Alistair boomed. "Then why do your limbs feel like lead? Why does your mind swim? The water you drank is tainted not with poison, but with the truth of your own stupidity. Lay down your arms now, and you will be shown mercy. Fight for the shadow, and you will share its fate." Chaos erupted. Some soldiers, more affected by the sedative or more guilt-ridden, dropped their weapons. Others, the hardcore loyalists, snarled and began to advance, though their steps were unsteady. The commander was screaming orders, but the cohesion of the garrison was crumbling into a confused, sluggish mob. The distraction was working beyond hope. At the northern palisade, Lyra heard the king's voice echoing through the trees. Her heart clenched with fear for him, but she had her own task. Kayla, using her powerful hind legs, leapt and scrabbled at a section of the log wall where the mortar was weak. A log shifted, then another. They created a narrow, dark gap. Lyra slipped through, the pups squirming in the pack. The gully was below, a pit of shadows and misery. The guards here were fewer, and they were staring towards the commotion at the main gate, distracted. The smallest pup pushed an image into her mind. The lock, the big lock on the main cage. Lyra moved like a wraith. She reached the large central cage where the strongest locks were. The guard nearby was leaning on his spear, yawning enormously. Using her silver dagger, she picked the crude iron lock with a healer's delicate precision. It clicked open. The sound made the nearest Omega, a gaunt woman with intelligent eyes, jump. She stared at Lyra, then at the golden eyes peeking from the pack, and understanding dawned in her exhausted face. "Quiet," Lyra whispered. "We're getting you out. Now. Help me with the others." Word spread through the pit in hissed whispers, a ripple of desperate hope. The Omegas, though weak, moved with a sudden, silent efficiency born of survival. They helped Lyra pick other locks, guided by the pup's subtle psychic nudges towards the guards who were most alert. One guard, less affected by the sedative, turned and saw the exodus beginning.
He raised a shout, lifting his crossbow. Kayla was a bolt of gray fury. She took him down before the shout finished, a single efficient motion. The message was clear. Within minutes, a stream of ragged, freezing Omegas was flowing up the rough path Lyra and Kayla had made, squeezing through the gap in the palisade and vanishing into the welcoming darkness of the forest. Lyra counted them, herding the last few, the pup's golden eyes now glowing softly to light the path for the stumbling refugees. Back at the main gate, the situation was reaching its climax. Alistair was holding off 3 unsteady attackers, his sword a blur. He was tiring, and more were gathering. The sedative was wearing off the hardiest among them. The commander had rallied a core group and was advancing with murder in his eyes. "Take the king alive," the commander bellowed. "He's worth alive to Lord Corvin." They closed in. Alistair knew he couldn't hold much longer. He had given Lyra the time she needed. That was the mission. Just as a soldier's blade slipped past his guard towards his side, a whowl split the night, a sound of pure, ancient power that froze the blood. It was not Kayla. From the tree line behind Alistair, 3 beams of brilliant gold light lanced out, striking the ground between him and his attackers. And there, standing small but impossibly fierce, were the 3 prophecy pups. They had left Lyra. They had come to him. They stood side by side, their eyes like miniature suns. They opened their mouths, and the psychic hum became a roaring chorus, not of words, but of king, loyalty, truth. The vision they projected was not of crimes, but of allegiance. They showed the soldiers the true king, not as a distant ruler, but as Alistair, the boy learning swordplay, Alistair mourning his father, Alistair laughing with his sister, Alistair kneeling in the blood-soaked cottage to bind a healer's wound. They showed the bond with Kayla, a silver thread of pure devotion. They showed the shadow of Valerius for what it was, a hollow, hungry thing that offered nothing but betrayal. The advancing soldiers stopped. They lowered their weapons, one by one, the fight draining out of them, replaced by a dawning, awful shame. The commander stared, his face crumbling from rage to despair. The pup's truth was a weapon more devastating than any sword. In that moment of stunned silence, a new sound arose, the sound of many footsteps, of hushed, urgent voices. From the northern tree line, Lyra emerged, leading the last of the Omegas, and behind her, Kayla stood, a silent sentinel. The garrison was surrounded, not by an army, but by the very people they had imprisoned and by the undeniable, luminous truth. Alistair lowered his sword, his chest heaving. He looked from the defeated soldiers to the rescued Omegas, to Lyra's triumphant, exhausted face, to the 3 small pups whose golden light was now softening, their job done. The gambit had worked. The serpent's lair was not stormed. It was unmade from the inside out by courage, cunning, and a truth that could not be fought.